What do you do when the man you sleep next to steals your career and manipulates your family into shutting their door in your face on a stormy night? Scream or beg for pity? I did not. When you work as a data crisis expert, you do not waste 1 second on tears. I simply stepped into the freezing rain, kept my head cold, and prepared to flip the board. The most brutal revenge is completely silent. Hello, wonderful audience of Violet Revenge stories. I sincerely hope you are all having a beautiful day. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization feature, which means we no longer have the budget to keep our operations running smoothly. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1. This small contribution gives us the budget to pay our hardworking team, helping them cover their daily living expenses so they can continue creating and bringing more engaging stories to you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code displayed on the screen or by clicking the donation link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you so much for your continuous love and support. My name is Addison Garcia. I am 35 years old, and I make my living as a data risk analyst. The rain in the Chicago suburbs was relentless tonight, slamming against the windshield of my sedan like a continuous barrage of icy bullets. The heavy wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, mirroring the chaotic blur of my own reality. It was pitch black outside, but the true, suffocating darkness was the image permanently burned into my mind just 1 hour ago. I had come home early, hoping to surprise my husband, Julian, only to find him physically entangled in our own bed with Victoria. Victoria was not just a random fling. She was the billionaire investor funding his entire startup project. The sickening scent of her expensive perfume lingering in my bedroom had made the air impossible to breathe. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply packed a small suitcase, grabbed my encrypted hard drive containing my most vital work, and drove straight through the violent storm to the only sanctuary I thought I had left in this world, my mother's house. I parked on the slick, wet asphalt and dragged my soaked suitcase to the front porch, shivering uncontrollably from the biting cold and the shock coursing through my veins. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, desperately needing the warm, unquestioning embrace of my family. Instead, the door slowly creaked open to reveal my younger sister, Sophia. Her eyes did not hold the warmth I craved. They were heavily defensive, clouded with a sickening mixture of pity and apprehension. She stood squarely in the frame, blocking the entrance, peering past her shoulder into the warmly lit living room. My blood ran significantly colder than the freezing rain pounding on my back. Julian was already there. He was sitting slumped on the family sofa, flanked securely by my mother and my older brother, Matteo. Julian had his face buried in his hands, playing the role of a devastated, emotionally exhausted husband to absolute perfection. He had beaten me here, while I was driving through the storm, trying to process the complete destruction of my marriage. Julian was weaving a flawless masterpiece of manipulation. I could practically hear the echoes of the toxic lies he had just fed my own flesh and blood. He had carefully constructed a narrative that the intense pressure of my corporate job had finally caused me to snap. He painted a tragic picture of a woman suffering from severe delusions, plagued by morbid, baseless jealousy. He told them I had violently smashed up our home in a psychotic rage before fleeing blindly into the night. He positioned himself as the ultimate victim, the long-suffering saint trying desperately to hold together a wife who was losing her mind. My mother stepped forward into the hallway, gently pushing Sophia aside. Her face was pale, and her voice trembled slightly, but her physical stance was an impenetrable wall of resolution. "Addison, you need serious help," she said, pointedly refusing to look me directly in the eye. "Julian told us everything that happened tonight. We all think it is best if you go to a psychiatric hospital right now, or at least check into a hotel for the night to calm down. You cannot come in here and tear this family apart with your episodes." I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them the truth about Victoria, about the grotesque betrayal unfolding in my own bed. But she firmly held up a hand to silence me. I do not want to hear your paranoid explanations right now. Just go get the help you clearly need." Before I could utter a single word in my own defense, the heavy oak door slammed shut in my face. The loud final thud echoed sharply against the howling wind. The deadbolt clicked firmly into place. I stood completely frozen on the porch, enveloped in an absolute, crushing isolation. The rain poured down heavily, soaking through my heavy coat, chilling me to the bone. I had just lost the man I promised to spend my life with, and now, in a matter of cruel minutes, my own family had discarded me like a stranger. The absolute desolation of that moment was suffocating. Yet, not a single tear fell from my eyes. There was no screaming, no desperate pounding on the wooden door. When you spend your entire professional life analyzing complex data and neutralizing catastrophic crises, you learn very quickly that emotions are a dangerous vulnerability you simply cannot afford when the system is crashing. I turned on my heel, gripped the handle of my wet suitcase, and walked steadily back to my sedan. I sat in the driver's seat, keeping the engine off, completely enveloped by the cold, damp air of the quiet vehicle. My hands were entirely steady as I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my laptop. I needed to secure my digital assets before Julian could attempt to touch them. I plugged in the hard drive containing the original encrypted data of the core algorithm I had spent 4 years meticulously writing. As the screen illuminated my wet face in the darkness, I bypassed the security protocols and accessed our central network. The root files had been altered. My breath hitched in my throat. Julian had not just cheated on me with his wealthy backer. The hidden timestamps and erased digital footprints revealed a far more sinister and calculated betrayal. He had systematically and quietly transferred the intellectual property rights of my entire algorithm directly into his own name. He was actively preparing to sell my life's work to Victoria's massive investment fund, planning to leave me with absolutely nothing. The chilling coldness in my chest instantly evaporated, hardening into something sharp, precise, and entirely unbreakable. The human instinct after such a catastrophic collapse is usually to seek oblivion. Most people would have checked into a motel and emptied 3 bottles of cheap vodka to numb the crushing betrayal. I did not possess that luxury, nor did I have the desire to lose my cognitive edge. Logic was my only lifeline. Within 24 hours, I had signed a month-to-month cash lease on a dilapidated, low-cost apartment situated in a completely obscure industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The constant, metallic grinding of the nearby manufacturing plants provided the perfect white noise for what I needed to do. I stripped the tiny living room of its broken furniture and transformed the space into a legitimate tactical war room. I set up 4 high-definition monitors I had purchased with cash, linking them directly to my encrypted hard drive. I taped massive whiteboards across the peeling wallpaper, ready to map out the anatomy of a monster. My first objective was a forensic deep dive into the financial architecture of my 4 years of marriage to Julian. I bypassed the standard banking portals, writing custom scripts to pull our entire raw transaction history, scraping data from every joint account, tax filing, and digital receipt we had ever generated. The deeper I dug into the encrypted ledgers, the more the horrifying truth crystallized before my eyes. Julian had not merely been unfaithful in our bed. He had been systematically executing a hostile financial takeover of my life for over 18 months. The joint retirement fund we had built together, which was supposed to secure our future, had been entirely gutted. He had quietly siphoned off every single dollar through a series of micro-transfers to an offshore holding account. He had executed these transactions in the dead of night, while I was sleeping right next to him. Even worse, he had utilized my social security number and forged my digital signature to take out massive, high-interest credit loans. He had effectively chained me to hundreds of thousands of dollars in toxic debt, using my pristine credit score to heavily capitalize his new shell company. Armed with a securely printed dossier of his financial crimes, I arranged a covert meeting with a highly seasoned, ruthless female attorney known for dismantling corporate fraud. We met in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. She reviewed the neatly organized stacks of evidence with a cold, predatory focus. her eyes scanning the forged loan applications and the drained retirement statements. When she finally looked up, her expression was entirely devoid of sympathy, which was exactly what I needed. Her advice was surgically precise. "Do not argue with him," she instructed, handing the dossier back to me. "Do not try to explain yourself to your family, and absolutely do not clarify anything on social media. Silence is your greatest asset right now. Let the data speak when the time comes." To execute a counteroffensive of this magnitude, my personal laptop was no longer sufficient. I needed access to military-grade investigative resources. I needed computing power capable of piercing through international financial veils. I sought out Aegis Nexus Intelligence, a notorious private cybersecurity and intelligence agency that officially did not exist on any public map or corporate registry. They were the invisible hand that handled catastrophic data breaches for sovereign wealth funds and ultra-high net worth individuals. I submitted my encrypted application through a dark web portal, bypassing their outer firewall just to prove my capabilities. Their entry examination was designed to break the best hackers in the world, presenting a brutal gauntlet of cryptographic puzzles and live-fire network defense scenarios. I dismantled their test in less than 2 hours. By the end of the day, I was officially appointed as their new Director of Crisis Management, granting me unrestricted ghost-level clearance to their most powerful investigative tools. Late that night, sitting in the subterranean server room of Aegis Nexus, I initiated a deep packet trace using the agency's supercomputers. My target was not Julian. My target was Victoria, the billionaire savior of his stolen startup. I fed her corporate tax identifiers and offshore routing numbers into the intelligence matrix. Watching the algorithms tear through layers of shell corporations and dummy holdings, what I found made my blood run cold, followed immediately by a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. Victoria was not a visionary venture capitalist. She was an apex predator currently in the crosshairs of a massive, multi-agency international money laundering investigation. The sprawling network of startups she supposedly funded were nothing more than sacrificial shell companies designed to clean dirty syndicate money. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. Victoria did not love Julian. She did not even care about the proprietary algorithm he had stolen from me. She needed a naive, ambitious, and greedy fool with a clean record to act as the legal owner of a new corporate entity. Julian was not her partner. He was her designated fall guy. He was eagerly building the exact financial slaughterhouse that would soon be raided by federal authorities. The urge to warn him, the leftover instinct of a wife trying to save her husband from walking off a cliff, flickered for exactly 1 second before I ruthlessly extinguished it. I chose absolute silence. Instead of raising the alarm, I used the immense processing power at my fingertips to quietly build an impenetrable legal firewall around my own identity. I severed every digital tie, retroactively proving the theft of my intellectual property and documenting his fraudulent loans. I stood in the shadows, completely protected, calmly watching Julian willingly lock himself inside a burning building. The silence of my isolated apartment was broken only by the relentless vibration of my cellular phone. The screen lit up endlessly, casting a harsh, artificial glow across the metal desk. However, these notifications were not the warm inquiries of a worried family. They were poisoned arrows of blame and judgment. I opened the messages, one after another, feeling the oxygen slowly drain from the room. My younger sister Sophia sent me links to psychiatric rehabilitation centers, her words dripping with a toxic blend of superiority and fake pity. But it was the message from my older brother Matteo that truly knocked the wind out of me. He wrote a long, condescending paragraph, treating me like a volatile child. "Addison, you need to stop this selfish madness right now." The text read, "Take your medication regularly and apologize to Julian. He is destroying himself trying to keep you safe and you are ruining his life." The sheer audacity of his words was suffocating. I had no medication. I had absolutely no history of mental instability. Yet, Julian had seamlessly and masterfully rewritten my entire psychological history in their minds over the span of a few short days. Through the social media algorithms I was quietly monitoring, I watched his grotesque, theatrical play unfold. Julian was making highly visible, public appearances at all of my family gatherings. He was sitting at my mother's dining table, eating her Sunday roast, looking appropriately exhausted and deeply concerned, when my elderly aunt fell seriously ill and required a prolonged, expensive hospital stay. Julian heroically stepped forward. He paid her exorbitant medical bills in full, dropping tens of thousands of dollars without a single hesitation. He used the very funds he had fraudulently siphoned from my credit lines to play the generous, selfless savior. He masterfully constructed the bulletproof image of a saintly, devoted husband who was being cruelly rejected by his unhinged, dangerous wife. My family practically worshipped him for it. They viewed him as the strong, dependable glue holding their tragedy-stricken family together, completely and hopelessly blind to the fact that he was the very architect of their impending destruction. The true sickening depth of his depravity revealed itself on a bleak Tuesday afternoon. I was running a routine digital sweep of my old synced voicemail servers, meticulously separating my personal communication data from the compromised accounts. An orphaned audio file caught my immediate attention. It was a message my mother had intended to leave for Julian, but she had accidentally dialed my old, currently forwarded business number. Her voice echoed through my headphones, full of nervous excitement and blind, absolute trust. She was enthusiastically confirming the final paperwork with the bank manager. She was talking about leveraging equity and securing massive financial returns. My stomach violently dropped into an abyss. Julian had systematically manipulated my mother into taking out a massive second mortgage on our childhood home. This was the house where my father had passed away. The house my mother had spent 30 long years paying off with her meager salary as a public school teacher. It was her sanctuary, her only financial safety net for her declining years. Julian had convinced her to invest the entire lump sum directly into his newly formed, fraudulent shell company. He had promised her an unbelievable, guaranteed return on her investment, claiming she would receive triple the interest within a mere 6 months. He was knowingly feeding her directly into Victoria's international money laundering slaughterhouse. I simply could not let my mother lose the roof over her head. Temporarily breaking my attorney's cardinal rule of absolute silence, I compiled a heavily redacted, physical dossier. I printed out the undeniable, hard proof of the shell company's toxic corporate structure and the direct, undeniable digital links to the offshore syndicate accounts. I made sure the data visualization was simple enough for anyone to understand without a finance degree. I placed it in a secure, tamper-proof envelope and paid for priority overnight courier delivery directly to my brother Mateo's corporate workplace. I tracked the package online, watching the digital status update to successfully delivered. I sat by my phone, waiting for the panicked, apologetic phone call from my brother. Instead, several hours later, I received a chilling, taunting email from Julian. He had anticipated my desperate move. He had intercepted the package before Mateo could even break the seal. Julian had then gathered my family and presented the sealed envelope as a vicious threat, lying effortlessly to their faces. He told them I was sending fabricated, unhinged documents to blackmail him, demanding extortion money to fund my supposed erratic, destructive lifestyle. Desperate to break through his impenetrable web of lies, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's cell phone number. The call immediately routed to a harsh, automated voice stating the subscriber was unavailable. I quickly tried Mateo. The exact same automated message played. I tried my sister Sophia. Nothing but a sterile, hollow disconnection tone. They had not just ignored my calls. They had systematically and collectively blocked my phone number from their devices. I was entirely, fundamentally cut off from the only people on this earth I shared blood with. They had consciously chosen the charming, sociopathic parasite over their own daughter and sister. The intense psychological pressure was perfectly designed to crush me, to make me doubt my own sanity, break down, and surrender to his narrative. I stood perfectly still in the center of my dark, industrial war room, surrounded by the glowing monitors detailing their impending financial doom. A heavy, suffocating silence pressed violently against my chest, threatening to crack my ribs. But then, something inside my mind fundamentally shifted. The equation changed. I did not collapse to the floor in a puddle of tears. I did not scream out in agony at the profound injustice of it all. Slowly, a small, cold half-smile crept onto my face. The agonizing, burning frustration instantly crystallized into a terrifying, absolute stillness. As a data analyst, I know that you cannot use logic to save people who are willfully blind to the variables. You cannot shout the truth at people who have actively plugged their ears with comfortable, easy lies. I realized right then that I had to stop trying to pull them away from the dangerous edge of the cliff. I had to let them walk right off it. I had to let them feel the scorching heat of the fire before they would ever believe there was a flame. The architecture of revenge is remarkably similar to writing a complex piece of software. You do not just build a program and blindly hope it runs successfully. You meticulously construct an isolated environment where every possible variable forces the exact outcome you desire. I sat in the dim, artificial glow of my tactical setup, fully utilizing the God-tier security clearance granted by my new position at Aegis Nexus Intelligence. The proprietary system Julian had stolen from me was indeed brilliant, but I was its original architect. I knew every single backdoor, every hidden blind spot, and every unpatched vulnerability in its skeletal structure. Over the course of 72 hours, I bypassed his superficial security firewalls and began feeding highly sophisticated, encrypted data packets back into my original source code. I was not destroying the system outright. I was carefully lacing it with digital poison. I programmed a deeply buried logic bomb, a fatal flaw woven directly into the core algorithm. It was entirely invisible to his standard diagnostic scans, waiting silently in the dark like a dormant virus. While I was operating invisibly in the shadows, Julian was aggressively stepping into the blinding, intoxicating spotlight. His newly formed technology firm was heavily pushing toward a massive media launch. He was making headlines everywhere, featured on the digital covers of several major business publications, boldly claiming to have revolutionized financial analytics all by himself. His company was actively courting tens of millions of dollars in venture capital. I watched the live streams of their press conferences on my secondary monitors. Julian stood confidently at the podium in a pristine, custom-tailored Italian suit, flashing his charismatic, practiced smile, utterly drunk on his fabricated power and stolen prestige. Victoria stood elegantly beside him, playing the perfect role of the visionary financial backer. He honestly believed he had won the war. He fundamentally believed he was untouchable. But a castle built on stolen land is always destined to fall. I securely compiled a massive, heavily encrypted digital dossier containing exact network topographies and offshore routing protocols. This was not a vague, emotional accusation. It was a precise, undeniable treasure map of Victoria's illegal syndicate operations, showing exactly how her dirty money was preparing to flow directly through the servers Julian currently owned, using a heavily routed, untraceable proxy network that bounced across a dozen different countries. I anonymously transmitted the entire package directly to the top cybercrime divisions of both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I did not ask the authorities to investigate a suspicion. I handed them the completed, undeniable puzzle on a silver platter. The invisible dominoes began to fall almost immediately. Through my monitoring algorithms, I watched the sheer panic slowly seep into Julian's corporate communications network. He started noticing severe financial anomalies. Several massive investment funds, likely tipped off by their own quiet regulatory connections, suddenly and inexplicably withdrew their letters of intent. Millions of dollars in promised capital simply vanished into thin air overnight. Julian's internal messaging servers lit up with frantic, desperate emails. He tried continuously to contact Victoria, demanding urgent explanations for the sudden exodus of their key investors, but the elusive billionaire was suddenly nowhere to be found. Her executive assistant claimed she was on continuous, extended business trips overseas, constantly bouncing between international safe havens. She was systematically cutting him loose, leaving him holding the bag, completely unaware that he was already drowning. The climax of my psychological warfare happened entirely by chance, or perhaps by the sheer, magnetic gravity of fate. I had briefly stepped out of my industrial exile to grab a decent cup of black coffee at an upscale cafe in the downtown financial district. I was wearing a simple, dark trench coat, devoid of makeup, looking exactly like the exhausted, defeated ghost he expected me to be. As I turned away from the counter, I practically collided with Julian. He was flanked by two young, overly eager junior executives. He paused, looking me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust and arrogant amusement. He sneered, speaking loudly enough for his colleagues to hear, intentionally mocking my current state. He confidently told me I looked absolutely pathetic, that my little jealous tantrum had cost me everything, and that he was about to close a corporate deal worth $50 million. He demanded that I finally accept my status as a total failure and stop embarrassing myself in public. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I stood perfectly still, letting his toxic words wash over me like water sliding off cold glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee, savoring the bitter taste on my tongue. I looked him dead in the eyes, stripping away every ounce of emotion until there was nothing left but absolute, freezing certainty. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of my mouth. "Enjoy the Chief Executive Officer chair while you still can, Julian," I said softly. My voice was barely above a whisper, yet it was sharp enough to cut right through the ambient noise of the crowded cafe. I did not wait for his reaction or give him the satisfaction of a response. I simply walked past him, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, feeling the undeniable weight of victory settling deep into my bones. That very night, precisely at midnight, the logic bomb I had planted deep within my stolen algorithm finally woke up. I sat in my war room, watching the live telemetry data stream across my 4 glowing monitors. The system Julian proudly claimed as his own began to execute a massive automated stress test, exactly as I had designed it to do. But instead of optimizing the data streams, the poisoned code systematically shattered the encryption barriers, separating the clean venture capital ledgers from Victoria's hidden, illegal money laundering accounts. The entire digital architecture violently collapsed in on itself. The system catastrophically crashed, entirely locking Julian and his administrators out of their own network. In doing so, it aggressively triggered a massive, automated failsafe that dumped the entire unencrypted history of Victoria's illicit international syndicate transactions straight onto the main, public-facing servers. Those server racks were, legally and undeniably, registered exclusively under Julian's personal name. The trap had officially snapped shut. The avalanche did not begin with a gentle rumble. It tore through the valley with absolute, deafening violence. At exactly 6 o'clock the following morning, while the city was still wrapped in a quiet dawn, a coordinated fleet of black federal vehicles surrounded the pristine, glass-enclosed headquarters of Julian's newly minted technology firm. Through the encrypted surveillance feeds I had tapped into, I sat in my industrial war room and watched with stone-cold satisfaction as dozens of armed agents wearing tactical windbreakers swarmed the lobby. They did not politely ask for the receptionist. They bypassed security, breached the executive suites, and immediately began physically seizing every server rack, every hard drive, and every single digital asset in the building. Simultaneously, digital warrants swept through the banking system within a span of less than 15 minutes. Every single corporate and personal bank account bearing Julian's name was aggressively frozen and locked down by federal authorities. His net worth plummeted from tens of millions of dollars on paper to absolute zero before he had even poured his morning coffee. When Julian frantically tried to access his wealth to hire emergency legal counsel, he was met with nothing but blazing red error screens. Panic, raw and unfiltered, finally set in. He desperately dialed Victoria's secure offshore satellite number, expecting his billionaire savior to deploy her army of corporate lawyers to fix the mess. Instead, he reached a dead tone. Victoria was not in her luxury penthouse. She was not in the city. The intelligence chatter on my Aegis Nexus monitors confirmed she had boarded a private charter jet 72 hours prior, officially vanishing into a non-extradition country in Eastern Europe. She had successfully completely liquidated her untraceable assets and abandoned ship, leaving Julian completely isolated to shoulder the devastating weight of international fraud, massive money laundering, and grand larceny. He was entirely broke, entirely exposed, and staring directly down the barrel of 20 to 30 years in federal prison. A cornered rat does not reflect on its mistakes. It bites whatever is closest to it. Stripped of his charming facade and his stolen wealth, Julian's true nature violently clawed its way to the surface. He drove his expensive sports car recklessly across town, arriving at my mother's quiet suburban house like a hurricane. He did not bother knocking this time. He practically kicked the front door open, his face red and contorted with an ugly, animalistic rage that my family had never been allowed to see. Through the audio feed of a security camera across the street, and later confirmed by the chaotic aftermath, I knew exactly how the scene unfolded in that living room. Julian paced the floor wildly, screaming at the top of his lungs. He cornered my elderly mother against the kitchen counter, aggressively demanding that she immediately contact a predatory real estate broker. He ordered her to sell the family home within 24 hours for a fraction of its market value. He needed hundreds of thousands of dollars in hard cash immediately to pay for a high-profile defense attorney and to secure his inevitable bail bonds. My sister Sophia stood trembling in the hallway, clutching her phone in sheer terror as she watched the saintly, perfect brother-in-law she had so eagerly defended morph into a violent, screaming extortionist. He completely dropped the act of the wounded, long-suffering husband. He cursed at them, his eyes wide and bloodshot, slamming his fists violently against the wooden dining table. Matteo, finally snapping out of his manipulated trance, stepped forward and attempted to physically block Julian from advancing on our mother. "Get out of this house right now." "Julian," Matteo shouted, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and profound regret. "You are completely out of your mind. We are not selling this house for you." Julian let out a sharp, maniacal laugh that chilled the room. He aggressively shoved Matteo backward by the shoulders. "You do not have a choice, you pathetic fool," Julian spat, spittle flying from his lips. "She already signed the preliminary mortgage transfer to my corporate holding account last week. If I go down, this entire family goes down with me. The federal government will seize this house to pay off my corporate debts before the week is over. You are all already bankrupt because of me. Now sell the damn house so I can save myself." The horrifying realization crashed down upon my mother. Matteo and Sophia all at once, the charming man they had invited to their Sunday dinners, the man they had chosen over their own flesh and blood, had systematically orchestrated their absolute financial ruin. My mother collapsed into a kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the sheer weight of her naive betrayal crushed her spirit. They were about to lose their home, their sanctuary, and their financial future, all because they had blindly protected a sociopathic fraudster. The chaos in the living room reached a fever pitch. Julian was screaming inches from Matteo's face, ready to throw a physical punch. That was exactly the moment I turned the doorknob and stepped over the threshold. The heavy wooden door swung wide open. The sudden rush of cold outside air silenced the room instantly. Julian froze mid-sentence, his arms still raised. Matteo, Sophia, and my mother snapped their heads toward the entryway. I did not come alone, and I certainly did not come looking like the broken, hysterical woman Julian had painted me to be. I stood tall, wearing a razor-sharp, dark-tailored suit, flanked securely by two towering, broad-shouldered private financial investigators from Aegis Nexus. Their presence alone commanded absolute, terrifying authority. I did not offer a warm greeting. I did not shed a single tear of vindication. I walked slowly and deliberately across the living room floor, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood. The silence was so absolute you could hear a pin drop. I stopped directly in front of Julian, who was suddenly breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically between me and the two imposing agents at my back. I raised my right hand and casually tossed a thick, securely bound legal dossier onto the center of the dining table. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the quiet room. "You are not selling anything, Julian," I stated, my voice as cold and hard as solid ice. "And the federal government will not be seizing this property to cover your monumental failures." Julian sneered, though his confidence was visibly fracturing. "You are bluffing. Addison, the mortgage paperwork is already logged in the system. The bank approved the transfer of her equity to my company. You cannot stop it." I looked down at the dossier, then back up into his terrified, desperate eyes. "You clearly do not understand how data works when you're not stealing it from me. 3 days before you walked my mother into that bank, I leveraged my new intelligence clearance to file an emergency, preemptive freeze on the deed of this property." I slowly tapped my index finger against the thick stack of papers. "I utilized the heavily documented proof of your forged credit loans to flag your name in the Federal Financial Crimes Database. Any property transfer, any equity loan, and any mortgage restructuring involving your signature was automatically rendered null and void the second it hit the underwriter's desk." The bank manager smiled and took the paperwork. "Julian, but the transaction was legally blocked before you even walked out of the lobby. My family's house is completely unencumbered. It is entirely safe." I watched the color completely drain from Julian's face. The arrogant, untouchable CEO vanished, replaced by a hollow, defeated shell of a man realizing he had just stepped onto a landmine. His last remaining lifeline, his final desperate hostage, had been surgically neutralized. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His heart had just plummeted into an endless, inescapable abyss, and he finally understood that I had orchestrated every single second of his spectacular downfall. The final divorce mediation took place in a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Chicago. The air was thick with the suffocating reality of the endgame. Julian sat across the heavy mahogany table, looking like a hollowed-out ghost of the arrogant executive he had pretended to be just weeks prior. His custom-tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled, ill-fitting dress shirt. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights facing federal indictments. His hands trembled violently as his court-appointed attorney reviewed the final separation agreements. When the mediator temporarily stepped out of the room, Julian suddenly broke down. The remaining shred of his pride disintegrated. He slid off his chair, dropping heavily to his knees right there on the corporate carpet. He looked up at me, his face slick with desperate tears, and begged. He pleaded with me to use my God-tier clearance at Aegis Nexus Intelligence to find the digital proof that Victoria had manipulated him. He swore up and down that he was just a naive pawn in her international money laundering syndicate, crying that he did not deserve to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, looking down at him. There was no anger left in my chest, no residual hatred, and absolutely no pity. I looked at him with eyes as cold as glacial ice. "You were not tricked, Julian," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You chose greed. You chose to gut my retirement, forge my signature, and sell my life's work. I did not force you to make a single one of those decisions. I simply did not stop you from destroying yourself." I turned to my own attorney and nodded. She formally submitted the final binder of legally binding evidence to the court recorder. It was the absolute, undeniable digital proof that surgically severed my name from every single toxic asset, fraudulent loan, and shell company Julian had created. I watched the last spark of hope completely extinguish in his eyes. With that final submission, I secured my absolute freedom and simultaneously anchored him to a conviction that would guarantee him several decades behind bars. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere was vastly different. I sat at a quiet corner booth in our favorite family-owned Italian restaurant. Across the table, My mother, my older brother Matteo, and my younger sister Sophia sat with their heads bowed. The heavy silence between us was punctuated only by my mother's quiet, heartbroken sobs. They took turns apologizing, their voices cracking under the immense weight of their guilt. They wept for how easily they had been blinded by a sociopathic outsider, and how quickly they had turned their backs on their own flesh and blood during my darkest hour. I reached across the white tablecloth and gently wiped a tear from my mother's weathered cheek. I loved them deeply, but the trauma of that stormy night had fundamentally changed the architecture of my heart. I needed to establish an unbreakable boundary. "I forgive you," I said softly, looking each of them in the eye. "But you need to understand that trust is not something we can magically restore overnight. It has to be rebuilt from the ground up, brick by brick. As long as we learn to respect the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, we can be a family again." They nodded in unison, accepting the reality of the long road to healing ahead of us as the months turned into a year. My career at Aegis Nexus Intelligence flourished beyond my wildest expectations. I was promoted to the highest executive tier, leading global crisis interventions. But my most profound achievement was deeply personal. Using my lucrative corporate bonuses, I established and fully funded a private legal aid foundation. It was specifically designed to provide elite cybersecurity and financial investigation resources to women who had been financially defrauded and manipulated within their marriages. I turned my deepest wound into an impenetrable shield for others. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I stood on the expansive balcony of my new corner office on the 40th floor. The wind whipped gently through my hair as I looked down at the sprawling, vibrant city of Chicago, watching the endless stream of morning traffic far below. My secure phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was an automated alert from the federal court system. Julian had just been officially sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal prison, without the possibility of early parole. I read the text message twice. A genuine, peaceful smile touched my lips. It was not the sinister, gloating smile of a vindictive victor. It was the profound, weightless relief of a woman who had finally reclaimed her entire existence. The heavy, suffocating storm clouds that had darkened my life for so long had completely dissipated. I turned my phone off, slipped it back into my pocket, and turned my back to the edge. I walked confidently back into my glass-walled boardroom, ready to tackle a brand-new international project. The board had been entirely flipped. Everything was truly just beginning. Hello again. My wonderful listeners, thank you so sincerely for staying with me and listening to the very end of Addison's journey today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and empowering, please consider supporting our channel. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization, and we rely entirely on the kindness of our audience to keep going. A donation of just $1 makes a massive difference. It allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families and continue creating these high-quality stories for you to enjoy. You can easily help us by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your incredible generosity and support. Have a beautiful and blessed day.